Hello and welcome to Rainbow Kids. We are excited to bring our learning resources to the college and adult education classroom. If you are watching this, you might be the faculty implementing this content in your college classroom, or you might be a college student and future childhood educator. Either way, you are the one who will make a direct impact on the next generation. This video library was designed with the college classroom context in mind. You can watch these videos as a group or assign the viewing to be completed ahead of time to support in-class discussion. We encourage you to make the content your own to fit your particular course's learning goals. The purpose of this video library is to expand knowledge for educators, adults, or caregivers working with young children, and to provide practical frameworks for building inclusive and welcoming spaces, including in the early childhood classroom. We have curated the videos into the following groups: Introduction and Concept Overview, Early Childhood Development Concepts, Early Childhood Development Strategies, and additional video shorts and resources. Leveraging case examples from the early childhood classroom, we define and explain how even small signals or actions can have a big and positive impact. The concluding section of the library provides actionable strategies and how-tos so that you can immediately implement these tools into your toolkit. And finally, we have provided a discussion guide to support the facilitator and students in engaging in reflection and conversation, along with ample additional resources, including the full webinar videos, all of which we encourage you to use as best fits your curriculum needs. We hope that you enjoy this video library and thank you for engaging with Rainbow Kids. Intersectionality, a concept developed by Kimberly Crenshaw, highlights how aspects of who we are, like our age, language, religion, culture, or ability status, are all overlapping parts of our identity and our understanding of privilege. As young children learn and grow, their brains are like sponges. You can nurture their innate curiosity and support their exploration of who they are and who is in their world. There are many examples of gender diversity throughout history from across the globe. In many tribes, for example, Two-Spirit people are revered and fill special religious roles as healers and ceremonial leaders.
Understanding intersectionality provides us with the opportunity to create dialogue reflecting on inequalities based on past paradigms, culture, and social constructs. As Dorothy Nolte states in her poem, "Children learn what they live." If children live with acceptance, they learn to love. The study of child development emphasizes that children's brains are like sponges, absorbing everything in their environment. Every piece of information they soak in makes connections in their brain that influence how they interpret the world.
We want to take a moment to recognize that talking about gender and sexual orientation with young children can feel really personal and may feel complex. So many of us grew up with negative messages about LGBTQ+ people in media and in our cultures. You may have also grown up with negative messages from your family, your religious community, your school community, or more. Or with families and communities that just didn't talk about these topics with us when we were young. So often, topics like bias and identity are seen as adult or mature topics. The assumption is that being silent about these topics is protective, but the silence we experience has an impact. It may have left us not knowing what to say now. It can also mean that we took in those negative messages in our societies because they were the only ones available. And we need some time to recognize that those messages are inside us, whether or not we want them to be, and whether or not we agree with them. In this way, the silence around gender diversity and sexual orientation with young children perpetuates and even exacerbates the bias in the world. We need to find ways to talk about these topics in age-appropriate language. Throughout this training, we'll be working on that.
We often hear nowadays conversations about getting rid of the gender binary, but what is that? Binaries are what we call when two things are in opposition to one another. For example, cats versus dogs, or princes versus princesses. And within these binaries, we have specific characteristics, beliefs, norms, and more that are associated with specific binaries. And for a long time, gender has been considered a binary, girls versus boys. We see this show up in gender norms or actions, beliefs, and cultural understandings of how we define gender.
But gender identity is about who someone is. It holds more truth and value. When I'm talking to someone, thinking about someone, teaching someone, I want to be focused on who they are. As Aziza shared, or how we think and talk about gender varies over time and cultures. And for so many of us, also dealing with historical legacies of colonialism that erased and discriminated against certain types of people. One of the many legacies of this time is that language for LGBTQ plus people is often pathologized, missing, or has needed to be recreated and reimagined. So we might be using words for identity you haven't heard of before, and there will likely be other ones in the future. Right now, I hear a lot about how people can be cisgendered, basically meaning that the first guess generally fits them. It combines cis, the scientific prefix for unchanged, with gender. And transgender, which means that in some way the person doesn't fit that first guess. So they end up navigating some kind of change in their lives. So we're also combining the scientific prefix for change with gender to make transgender. And we know that people can identify as male, female, both, or neither. And folks who identify as either both or neither often use the term non-binary. And as Aziza shared earlier, depending on the language we're speaking, cultural background, and more, people can have even more words for themselves. But for this training, those are the general groups in English at the moment. We also want to take a moment to be thoughtful about fluidity, how all of us change over time, and the gender changes too. For some of us, that fluidity is the difference between being a girl and being a woman, or how becoming a parent can change how our identity and who we feel we are. And for some of us, those changes and what we choose to share about them involves names, pronouns, and finding new ways to talk about who we are. Those changes don't invalidate our present or our past. And as we talk with and listen to children about identity, we don't need to lock them into any one identity or assume what their identity right now means for their future. We can welcome and support who they are right now.
So then we ask ourselves, well, why should we listen to our children or our students? Well, this is because it affirms who they are. Many LGBTQ youth have experiences of not being listened to nor being affirmed by their immediate family. This is not only detrimental to their well-being, but also their health. And from the 2022 Trevor Project National Survey, we see that of the nearly 34,000 LGBTQ youth polled ages 13 to 24 across the US, that about 14% had attempted suicide and 45% seriously considered it in the past year. The Family Acceptance Project protects our children from mental health issues such as depression, suicide, anxiety, and more. And we also see that almost 10% of youth ages 13 to 17 in the US also identify as LGBTQ. In fact, can you all guess what the percentage of Gen Z, so our youth born 1997 to 2003, are LGBTQ according to a recent Gallup poll? I'll give y'all a moment to think. So 21%, or about 1 in 5 of Gen Z are LGBTQ according to that 2022 Gallup poll. But I do want to note that this percentage may be higher because the poll did exclude youth born between 2003 and 2012, since they're technically not legal adults, and members of Gen Z who have turned 18 since 2017 are twice as likely as older members of the generation to identify as LGBT. So it's clear that there is a need to have these conversations early on because our youth are dynamic, challenging gender norms and cultural norms, and we should be prepared to support these conversations and build the language to affirm them.
So we just shared a lot of information with all of you, and we're not done, but we do want to take a moment to take a breath and really remember that this is a learning journey. We've all started where we've started for really valid reasons. Whether you feel like a novice or like your ideas are being reaffirmed by this presentation, we all have more we can learn. Some or all of this information may be really new for you, and learning new things can feel uncomfortable or overwhelming. Please remember that it is also a process, and this information does become more familiar. And this could be really exciting, familiar but helpful, or something else entirely. Thank you for taking this time to listen to us and each other, for being open to learning more, practicing new skills, and taking steps to create a safer world. We know that the more we create acceptance and support for LGBTQ plus young people, the healthier and happier they will be. By 2, we'll see children start to reflect ideas about gender in their home culture. So in my cultural context, that can mean pointing to a picture of kids with short hair and saying, boy, or giving a truck to a boy to play with, or choosing to only play with dolls. And by 2.5 years old, children will share about who they are. You can probably picture a child this age saying, I'm a big girl, or loving to wear a color or a texture of clothing, or being uncomfortable with certain kinds of clothing. Those are all aspects of sharing who they are and what they like. I also know kids this age that are clear they're not the gender we assume them to be. I've known children this young start telling people they trust that they're a boy, not a girl, or a girl, not a boy, as soon as they could talk. We'll also see young children not identifying with a gender binary at this age. This can look a number of different ways, including focusing on their name, like saying, I'm Rowan, if asked if they're a boy or a girl, or focusing on being a kid, or getting really into playing an animal character and talking about being that animal as an alternative to talking about gender. And there are consequences if we stay silent. Children learn that adults accept stereotypes and that they should too. Silence can even create fear. For children, it can seem like the topic is so dangerous, adults can't even talk about it. We also know that silence has a profound impact on children's sense of themselves, particularly if they happen to be one of the people that adults aren't talking about. So one example of this comes from the 2015 US Trans Survey by the National Center for Trans Equity, the most recently published study of transgender people by transgender people. Of over 27,000 respondents, 60% began to feel their gender was different from their assigned gender by age 10, but only 5% started to tell others. Think about the fear, shame, and isolation those 95% of children were living with for so long. We cannot decide who children are, but we can support and influence how they feel about themselves and other people.
When merging concept of gender norms, the most common way that we normalize this binary for children is through early childhood toys. And on the left side, you can pause and see, we see toys like baby carriages, makeup, and house sets. And all of these toys attribute to girls' stereotypical gender norms and expectations of caring about physical appearance and domestic roles. And on the right side, we see toys for boys, like pirate ships, T-Rexes, and more, that attribute to boys, emphasizing violence and aggression. So when we normalize these toys as girls and boys items, we're also telling children that in order to inform their gender, these are the skills they must learn and perform starting at an early age. But for kids who are exploring their identity, for example, their gender, this may be a confusing notion. The assumption that there are only two categories of gender, as that's what gets replicated and reinforced in society, may not be affirming to them. Additionally, for kids who aren't exploring their gender identity, not interacting with gendered toys may send a message to them that they are not the norm, viewed outside of the box, and this can also be harmful. So rather than reinforcing gendered toys, we want to give children the freedom to choose items that make them happy. And doing so supports the unlearning of gender binaries, social constructions of set genders, and highlights the freedom for children to explore what is good for them.
So how can we start having those conversations? I use a few different strategies. One is making sure to be calm and matter of fact about what I'm saying, but also somewhat pared down. For example, by saying there are lots of different ways to have a family. Children will ask questions when they are ready, and that will help you know what else they're trying to understand. Using language that you've heard kids use for themselves or their families is another way to find language for what you want to talk about. So for example, in my first classroom, one of my students called his moms mommy and mamai, so we did too. Another child I know would say, I'm an in-betweener, which was their way of describing being between a boy and a girl. Not everyone will want the same words used for them, so it's important to listen and mirror back their language. It's also important that we offer vocabulary about identity. As Jonathan Van Ness shared in their 2022 Netflix series, they were 30 before they had a word for who they are. How do you build a strong sense of self if you feel like you're something that can't even be named? How are you ready to accept your friend's identity if you haven't heard of it before? Encourage conversation, share your observations, and ask children questions. Answer their questions, and let them know when you don't know something and learn about it together. While I'm focusing on spoken language in this slide, I also want to mention that children may use other ways to communicate, like sign or communication board. But these tools can be adapted to have inclusive signs and images. And which strategies I use is dependent on the children's own growth and development, and connecting with where a child is so important. And it's also dependent on context. I use different strategies when there's a conflict between children or something hard is happening than when I'm reading a book or we're chatting together or traveling in a car.
Instead of opting for gendered marketing, we want to encourage non-gendered examples of toys and clothes. It's important to show diversity to highlight that children should be able to play and explore their own understandings of gender norms. Some examples that you all might see on this slide are children using ironing boards, playing with toy trucks, and even embracing their chef talents. Overall, the images here serve to highlight that young kids can be and do whatever they want. And we should embrace the things they like rather than assume they like toys because society tells us it's correlated to their gender. It's also important for children to see representation in the world around them when it comes to family and love too. Unfortunately, most media and marketing tends to be limited towards heterosexual love. So thinking about your favorite children's movie, my favorite movie growing up was The Princess and the Frog and Cinderella. If we look at this slide, it shows what children could see when they're shopping for dollhouse families. And typically, most toy companies will sell family sets that include one mom, one dad, one boy, and one girl, also all of the same ethnicity. So until companies start carrying more diverse toys, we can actually mix and match dollhouses to widen our children's understanding of what kind of families exist in our world. We also acknowledge that representation starts within our own families. And we acknowledge that many families don't solely look this way. So we have to think about expanding our children's outlook and embracing room to appreciate inclusivity.
Another way we can start to make a little more room for each other is by using more gender neutral language. So again, I'm going to invite you to think about a possible response as I read the slide to you. With each different bubble, I'll make a suggestion and give you a moment to think about your idea. So for the first one, you're at the park and coming up with ideas for how to help a child find a playmate, instead of assuming the other child's gender based on appearance. So, for example, saying, maybe that boy in the sandbox would like to play. You could say, maybe the child in the sandbox would like to play. Or, there's a possible new friend who might like to play in the sandbox. Instead of saying mom and dad, or even parents, you could say, did Chihu's family come to school today? Did Chihu's grown-ups come to school today? And instead of addressing a group as boys and girls or ladies and gentlemen, we could say, friends, it's time to clean up for the day. Or even, everyone, it's time to clean up for the day. I'm sure you all came up with some great ideas too. There will always be times when the story we want just isn't out there yet. And it can be fun to make up a story. So here's an example of one we made up. A prince was captured by a dragon that took the prince to her lair. Oh, however am I going to escape this mess, the prince cried. Suddenly, a knight in shining armor rode into the lair on his white horse and scared the dragon away. My hero, said the prince, and they lived happily ever after. And here's another one. Sunny the snail was an adventurous snail. They spent their day in a lush garden filled with flowers, vegetables, and shady trees. Sometimes Sunny would sit near the side of a mossy stone when the days were hot, so they could keep themselves cool and protected. Other days, Sunny would creep out of their little spot near the rock and slime their way as high as they could along the smooth branches of the apple tree to take a peek around. Sunny liked seeing things from a different perspective. Who could you tell stories about? What stories do you think are missing from the children's lives?
How do we navigate conversations of gender inclusive classrooms with parents who don't understand or don't agree with these topics?
And there's this piece that there's a personal conversation like we talked about before, and there's a professional space that teachers hold, where no matter what our personal backgrounds, our personal comfort levels are, our job is to create a space that is welcoming to everyone. Above and beyond that piece, as Nacy says, our biggest thing is to not harm children. And so we need to hold a space where we are able to be welcoming, we are able to be kind, we are able to be curious, and we are able to tell people that they exist and they matter. And that's true for everyone who walks in our door. And that can get tricky if it feels like it's in competition. But I think coming back to that same place of we're going to hold boundaries so that kids are safe, so that kids get to explore, so that kids get to learn and grow and feel the safety they need in order to do that. And so there's a piece for me that's like, it gets into the complexities and the nuances. Because for me, also in my role with parents, the thing I want to do first and foremost is listen. I don't want to hear one question or one statement or one like, don't let my boy wear a dress or don't let my girl come home in blue, and assume that I know what that means to them, or I know what that child goes through when they go home, if that happens, or any of those things. I want to be curious, right? The parent might be coming to you to say, like, I'm uncomfortable with the diapers my kid was sent home in because we go straight from here to a grandparent's house and we aren't ready to have this conversation with grandparents yet. So we really need in that moment for this boundary to be maintained. And I want to know that. I want to know what the family's going through. And I want to have their trust that they can come to me next time and say, okay, I'm feeling like I'm ready to have this conversation. Can you give me ideas? Can you give me resources? Can we talk it through? Right? I want parents to know that we value their perspective, even when the professional language disagrees with the solution they've jumped to, because there's so often that those solutions they jump to, there's fear or there's worry behind that line. right? There's a reason they're scared. There's a reason they're concerned. They have a deep love for their child, and wanting what's best for their child. And so figuring out how to have that conversation, how to listen, and then because then they're also more likely to listen to us as to why we don't draw lines between what a child can pretend to be, between who can use what in the classroom.
I think too, as you had mentioned earlier, that this might also be once again like a teachable moment for our parents. I tell folks that I train when we do some scenario practice, like for some parents who might be coming into this space agitated or irritated, there might be some external things that are going on in the house or environmental factors that are making them feel riled up. And this might be the icing on the cake for them. So just acknowledging that some of the anger and frustration might not be directed onto you because of external things that are going on. Take that, embrace it, and see if there's any room for teaching or if there's any room for just fully listening to what the parent has going on, because it might also be directly impacting that kid. So the more that we're able to kind of build that rapport for parents, it helps us gain that trust and also allows the parent to trust us as educators to know what we're doing and knowing that we're keeping their children safe and just expanding their horizons.
Another piece for me is to create that space where there are moments for conversations, right? We both need to listen, and we need to give kids the vocabulary and information that they need to talk about those things, whether that's this happened and it felt unfair, or this is a group of people we haven't been talking about or aren't in our general books. We're going to specifically bring in books like True You, where kids talk about their own gender, or when Aiden became a brother, or just books that bring up narratives that we haven't heard in the day-to-day. So that does often mean bringing up gender expansive and transgender experiences to kids so that they have a fuller story of what gender is. And some of it is setting those boundaries, right? Like, you get to choose what you want to do. You know who you are. And inviting kids to talk about, to draw about, and to play about who they are as well as who they might want to be. I mean, I was going to add one more thing, because as we talked about earlier in the training, just to refer back to, it's also about who do you know? Like, how do you build up relationships with folks in your community that have that healthy gender that you want to talk about? Whether that's we're going to be working on garden curriculum this year, and we want to work with someone from the community gardens to help us set this up, and really thinking about, like, are there female gardeners that might contradict the stereotypes kids have, and not having them come once, but having a way to build up that relationship so kids get to know that person.
Young children make connections about their world, and as educators, we have daily experiences of how children do so in the classroom. Let's pause and think about this scenario. As you observe children playing during free play, you see 3 children playing in the dramatic play area. One of the children rushes towards you and tells you that Alex said only girls can be cooks. Alex approaches you and says, "Right, teacher, only girls can cook." A child who wasn't playing in the dramatic play area gets close to you and the other children and says, "My dad cooks at my house and makes the best enchiladas." Have you encountered similar conversations among children in your classroom? How would you have handled this situation as a teacher? Some examples could be, you could say, "Cooking is something everyone can do," or "My grandma did not love to cook as much as my grandpa." This example demonstrates a gender stereotype, a bias that society often perpetuates in subtle and not so subtle ways. Every day, we are delivering messages to young children, shaping their notions about who they are and who's in their world, through media and marketing, through how we dress them and the toys we give them, and even through subtle word choices. In my experience as an educator, it is common to say, "This is for girls and this is for boys," or "Let's line up, 1 line for girls and 1 line for boys." What are other ways we can start to use gender neutral language in the classroom?
Yes, and also too, one thing that we share in our trainings is that visibility, the tangible visibility matters. So, even though it might seem minuscule to have like a button with a rainbow on it, or have like a flag in your classroom, even a poster that has pronouns, those are all very subtle but really impactful ways that we can show our visibility and support. And also too, for potentially LGBTQ parents that are worried about how their youth or their children are going to be protected or safe in a school environment, having that visibility also matters for those parents to feel affirmed. And as Nathaniel mentioned, it's just about creating that equitable space for all to just feel visible and seen in the classroom.
So we brought in a board book called the Pronoun Book, which just gives examples of different ways that people can be. We also found a board book about families and just giving time. Like we didn't say like, we won't be in the classroom if she's uncomfortable. We said, okay, like this is an opportunity for her to feel those feelings and work this through and get support. And she chose to read the Pronoun Book every day with her like main person every single day. And she just needed that time to sit and think about it. She, like more than anyone else in the classroom, she needed a chance to hear, the way you expect things to be aren't always the way they are. And you deserve support to work that through, but also do it when you're 1 and 2. Like work on that skill now, because that's foundational for you. And that will serve you your whole life to be able to be like, okay, this is different. And there are things I can do to learn. This is different than what I knew. I mean, the biggest piece for me, again, comes back to listening, right? Listening and reflecting back who they say they are. Right? I know a child who later on decided to use female pronouns, but at a very young age was just really clear they weren't a girl or a boy yet, or like the masculinity they've been handed was not what fit them, and that's all they needed to know in that moment. And I just remember at one point they were at a parks program, and someone was like, so boys and girls, or like boys in this line, girls in that line. And like this child had the gumption to be like, excuse me, but where do the kids go? Right. And then we were like, okay, like you're a kid. Like we're going with this. And like not asking, are you a boy or a girl all the time, right? But like, we're just going to talk about kids. We're going to listen and reflect back where you are right now. And we're going to offer you, again, we've said this a couple of times, we're going to offer you more information about the fact that you can be not what you're assigned in different ways. And here's different people that feel that way. And I think for me, there's so much that's layered on with that coming out process of other people's expectations, who needs to know and when. I've known families that have been asked by their preschools to write a letter to the community about what's going on. And while that can come from the intention of like, this is your child, your family, we want it to come from your voice, oftentimes families listen better to other families about their own experiences than to us. It's also not fair for a school to say like, we're going to single you out and make you explain yourself. Right. So finding that pathway through to saying that piece of like, like, how do you want us to help? How do you want us to support you? These are some things that we could try. And also telling, like being in that place to help hold that space of like, they get time, they get to figure this out. I understand that you have questions and that this is new for you. I'm happy to talk with you about in general, about gender expansiveness and kids and how kids can understand this, but I'm not going to talk with you about a particular family situation.
But one of the bigger things I will name is like, do not make it about yourself. As mentioned, coming out as it can be a brave act, but also it can be an act coming out of a need for safety. So for potential educators, a youth coming out to you might indicate that they're exploring their identity and they trust you with that identity. We don't know if at home they've shared that identity, but they trust that this educational space is a safe and affirming space. So when they do come out to you, say, thank you. How can I support? Or thank you for letting me know. Is there anything else you feel comfortable sharing? My response is to hold when somebody comes out to you as a establishment of trust, as an establishment of I see you as a safety net, and can you support me as I move forward in this journey? So it's a really special thing for someone to come out, and it's an even bigger thing when people are coming out multiple times and reshaping and revamping their ideas of who they are, because they're in a comfortable space of exploration.
Thank you for exploring the Rainbow Kids resources for adult ed and college educators. In this video library, we have explored introductory concepts plus early childhood development concepts and strategies. We hope that these resources inspire and equip you with the tools to create inclusive and impactful learning environments for young children. As you continue your journey as an educator, we encourage you to revisit these videos and resources. Additional resources available online include the original webinar video recordings, complete slide deck and script, and more. Use these resources to support in-class discussions and achieve learning goals for your class, in addition to sparking creativity, fostering inclusivity, and building supportive frameworks for educators, parents, and caregivers. Thank you for being a part of Rainbow Kids and for your dedication to building a welcoming and inclusive world for all children.